All right, let's talk a little Christian nationalism.
So you see, I also call myself a Christian nationalist, and that's not a bad word.
O Lord, bless this thy hand grenade, that with it thou mayst blow thine enemies to tiny bits in thy mercy. God will make you pay. Smite them.
Yes, smite them. This is an interesting thing for us to do, which is report something from the Babylon Bee, which we know is a satirical website here. But I think it is worth talking about in the context of Christian nationalism that we've been tracking. And so the Babylon Bee.
I want to make a quick comment before you read it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think this article you're about to read from the Babylon Bee introduces so much more complexity to what it means to be a Christian in America and see this Christian nationalist, which was already complex because there's the real Christian nationalists and then there's the media boogeymen of Christian nationalism. Then there's the interchurch conversation about Christian nationalism. And then there's the Babylon Bee coming in and making it even more complicated.
Yeah.
So it is fun, but there is some real thinking to be done here.
Yeah. So the headline here is The Babylon Bee Explains Christian Nationalism. And it's got this header picture here with a family in a church pew there reading the Bible. And then the Babylon Bee explains Christian nationalism written in bloody gore. Christian nationalism is a satanic movement. Remember, this is satire. Christian nationalism is a satanic movement in which Christians love America and vote for Republicans. It is literally the evilest thing that has ever existed in this country and the gravest danger the American church has ever faced. It is important to stop this wicked, depraved, idolatrous movement before they organize another insurrection or worse, elect a Republican. Origins. One day, Trump had a meeting with Satan in his underground lair and concocted a diabolical plan to trick Christians into voting for him by banning abortion and helping all the people find jobs. Thus, Christian nationalism was born, and millions of so-called Christians voted for Trump, even though he's a sinner. Despicable. Beliefs. Christian nationalists literally worship Trump. They think he's a god. They pray to him and stuff. At least some of them do. At least we think. The rest worship Jesus, but still voted for Trump, which is really no different than worshiping him. Shame. Methods, and there's a list here, bullet points. Methods, prayer, voting for Republicans, going to church, having lots of kids, being white, can also be black or Hispanic, but voting for Trump automatically makes them white. Memorizing the Constitution, building walls, insurrection, dancing around a golden Trump statue and sacrificing virgins in a roaring fire in the light of a full moon. Notable accomplishments, making America the most racist country in the world, turning millions away from Christianity, overturning Roe v. Wade. How to spot a Christian nationalist? You can always tell a Christian nationalist by their MAGA hats. If they're not wearing a MAGA hat, you'll know by when they say things like, I love America, or, gee, I'm not a fan of what Biden's doing. Just like the Nazis. This is pretty funny. Famous Christian nationalists, Hitler, Satan, and Trump. But we repeat ourselves. Famous enemies of Christian nationalism, AOC, Joseph Stalin, Fidel Castro, David French. Okay, so we have this article that is satirically trying to make fun of the way Christian nationalists are painted by maybe the likes of The Atlantic that we've reported on, or some other outlets who really try to make it seem like kind of what the Babylon Bee is doing here. They're like, oh, if you're a Christian nationalist, you are this like horrible, almost unbiblical person. You're almost a Satan worshiper. They don't really quite go that far, but that's where the satire comes in. But at the same time, we're seeing this kind of disappointed me in a sense because it still misses the main kind of thing with Christian nationalism, the whole psyop element that we've been talking about. Historically and whatnot. It's interesting to see Babylon Bee
felt
quasi defend Christian nationalism.
I'm muted
by using satire, which goes into the conversation about memes and the left can't meme and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I've this is kind of annoying. I had my Skype muted on accident, so the podcast listeners will hear me trying to butt in and you doing a wonderful job of ignoring me.
Oh, that's how I do it. Okay, just pretend like you're muted. Okay, I know.
Like, wow, he's really just blasting through on this one. Okay, no, I've never felt so attacked by the Babylon Bee.
Okay.
Like,
wow.
It's interesting. They've had a few things, and I'm a pretty easygoing guy. There's a lot of things to make fun about me and the way I was, brought up and things like that. And, the Babylon Bee is no stranger to like making fun of charismatics or Pentecostals or whatever. And that's fine. Right. But to hear reading this as it sort of it just gave the vibe that is defending Christian nationalism.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is troublesome because they don't quite get like the nuance of what's happening here. They're just kind of towing the Republican, just taking the bait, so to speak, that is placed in front of them to like, hey, you should defend Christian nationalism because you're constitutionalist and right wing and conservative and a Republican and all that stuff. As if there were
no legit criticisms of Christian nationalism within the church. It kind of, and part of it is it's just not a very good representation of how Christians should be thinking about Christian nationalism.
Yeah. Again, it really misses the main point about the PSYOP element stemming from
totally.
Yeah, the 40s.
I want to go further into the PSYOP thing, but even the very first sentence, Christian nationalism is a satanic movement in which Christians love America and vote for Republicans. I read that and I was like, well, yeah, I mean, you could describe it that way.
There is no, if you take it from our perspective of what we've been talking about, there is kind of like a, I mean, you're almost admitting you're buying.
Yeah, putting nation over Jesus, especially because a lot of the Christian nationalist stuff, or at least the real evidence, the real Christian nationalists, not the media representation, but straight from their mouth, their own videos, will advocate. They won't even mention Jesus at all while advocating basically taking over the country.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of should make Christians uncomfortable when you see that. Whether or not that's truly satanic, I don't know, but I could see somebody describing it that way unironically.
Yeah. Well, there's a line in here too. So it says one day Trump had a meeting with Satan in his underground lair and concocted a diabolical plan to trick Christians into voting for him by banning abortion and helping all people find jobs. Just that part, a diabolical plan to trick Christians into voting. I think that's kind of what this is, like in the context
we've literally seen that documented. And the creation of the Christian voting bloc as a controllable group of people was an actual strategy put on paper in order to win elections versus considering them just a citizen, just like everybody else. There were strategies and agenda to coagulate all American Christians into one voting bloc versus, whatever, letting them vote how they want to vote.
I reference back just real briefly to Two Masters and Two Gospels by our friend Dr. Future. And on page 170, he was citing a gentleman named, let me try to find the name, Jonathan Herzog. He's an academic historian. And he was kind of talking about the history of, the intel operations in the 40s and stuff. And he says, this is Dr. Future summarizing. He states that our American leaders were concerned at the start of the Cold War that Americans might actually find communism desirable over the unbridled capitalism of the moneyed interests in America. And thus they felt they had to emphasize its one desirable attribute, which, for communism, which is atheism, to exploit to sway the public. One of its tenets was to sell communism as a religion and thus worthy of a religious-fueled holy war, much like with the Islam today. He notes a key event held in May 1947 at the White House, where CEOs and media moguls met under the auspices of the Justice Department, naming their new group the American Heritage Foundation. They proposed to invigorate a generic quote-unquote faith or civil religion into the public square to win the Cold War propaganda and psychological conflict. It initiated a quote freedom train that carried the nation's founding documents from city to city, much like the Lenin train in 1918. While local community organizers were told to host, quote, community rededication weeks and Interfaith Day. And the American Heritage Foundation also wrote the Freedom Pledge to be recited in mass as the train passed through towns in the New Orleans Sugar Bowl. 75,000 people recited the Freedom Pledge in unison. Attorney General Tom Clark and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who a decade later led the COINTELPRO and other programs to infiltrate American peace and civil rights groups as agent provocateurs to investigate violence, helped spearhead the campaign. So just right there, I mean, we can go on and on and on. You know, Dr. Future documented a lot of this, and Herzog has documented all the stuff. So intel operation, a psychological operation to control the masses into believing that they need to vote a certain way, act a certain way, shape their faith a certain way to fight the enemies of America. And that's kind of the same playbook that we're seeing with Christian nationalism. So when I see Babylon Bee, do this, it's funny, but also very disappointing. Like, come on, guys. There's a little bit more to nuance. There's a little bit more to this that, and I guess the problem is the politicization. It's like uncool to not, defend Christian nationalism in a certain sense.
Well,
and at least in certain circles. And I don't know. That's why in the headline or the title of this episode in the subheadline, I have Babylon Boo, because, boo, boo, not fun.
Even someone in the chat here, there's a message says, deconstructionist Kevin Max is all about Christian nationalism today. Must be the hip new thing to be against. So kind of the implication there being to be against Christian nationalism is, first of all, of course, other people are talking about it now. That's just how our lives work, Gons. Yeah. So to criticize Christian nationalism is to side with deconstructionists or something. And that's called a psyop, first of all. Yeah. so keep that in mind. Number two, so, even the idea now to criticize Christian nationalism is considered weak or not really Christian or something like that to some. And I think that's kind of the vibe that this Babylon Bee thing gives, which is like, oh, you don't like Christian nationalism? Well, we're going to make fun of you now and misrepresent. Now, look, if you use this Babylon Bee, if you use this Babylon Bee as an example of media criticism, like that I get them criticizing like The Atlantic, for writing what they wrote about rosaries or whatever. Right. That is applicable, but I think it's pretty dangerous to give the impression to Christians that to not support Christian nationalism makes you not a good Christian is a very dangerous thing. That's playing exactly.
It's buying into the misrepresentation,
and a straight psyop. Honestly,
that's what I'm saying. It's a psyop to
keep the Christian voting bloc cohesive.
And it's troubling to me. I mean, it's caused me to start considering writing a Medium article to just lay out some of the facts behind the history, and hopefully that can maybe make the rounds.
And you just got to ask yourself. You got to ask yourself, who would benefit from, to put it in certain words, who would benefit from demonizing anti-Christian nationalism? It's Trump. It's Republicans. I mean, those are the people who benefit when you shut down criticism about Christian nationalism. And I've said it plenty of times before. It's totally normal to desire your government to reflect your own beliefs. That is totally okay. I'm not even saying that's a abnormal thing to want. But you can't, that is just not the way it's supposed to go. You're not supposed to take over countries by, force or violence being one aspect of it. But also coercive means is not a great way to do it either. And no, that is not me giving support to abortion or giving support to whatever sort of example you want to give. It's simply recognizing that Jesus did not do what he did so that we could, control Congress or something.
Right. Yeah, it's the little nuances. It's kind of the critical thinking about the situation. It's looking at the history of the situation that causes us to be not very popular amongst the masses and hanging out on the fringes,
This is why we will continue to be on the fringes. Even though everything we've been covering for 10 years is now mainstream, we continue to find ways to keep ourselves on the fringes. And I think in this case, not supporting, a certain version of Christian nationalism is our new version of, what makes us fringy around here.
Yeah, and they really go after Andrew Torba. There's an ADL.org article, the 5 things that you should know about Andrew Torba. And they just, he's the Gab founder. And, they really go after him. Then there's the Washington Post, who published the article, Republicans Mostly Mum on Calls to Make GOP Party of Christian Nationalism. And again, it's really highlighting Marjorie Taylor Greene. And, man, the psyop is coming from all sides when it comes to us, Basil, because, Marjorie Taylor Greene talked about the Jewish space lasers, not those words, but that's how it was characterized. Yeah. And, those are real things. Those are things we've talked about. So somehow we get lumped in with the Christian nationalist kind of crowd, the Marjorie Taylor Greene flavor. But then also we're pushing back on this idea of Christian nationalism and showing how it's probably likely a political psyop.
We're getting lumped in with deconstructionists. I know. We just can't win. There is one thing that comes from this that communicates a positive note, and that is the war over the Christian voting bloc is so rife with intensity and psychological operations and that the value of the Christian voting bloc, it really shows the value of the Christian voting bloc. Yeah. They would not be fighting this hard over it if it didn't matter.
Right.
It really does show the value and the strength that Christians have as a whole, or the church has as a whole in the United States, that such resources and such intensity and such effective psychological operations need to be put into use to try to gain control of it. And again, like you said, coming from all sides. So that is a bit of, that should be encouraging to the church, knowing that, the church is so valuable politically that it is being fought over vociferously. But that does mean that it's going to be,
heavily there's a risk. Targeted.
There's a risk of tearing it apart.
That's probably what they want.
You're being pulled in 2 different directions. Tearing it apart is sort of the ultimate, if it's not the goal, it's certainly a risk.
Well, I think this issue in particular, it has caused many Republicans to come out and push back against it, which swings the pendulum, or starts swinging the pendulum back the other way. We saw it really swing conservative right wing, and this type of thing can really start swinging a lot of Republicans to be more not aligned per se, but just sort of in this context of this particular topic, more agreeable with a Democrat, perhaps. So, just things to look out for, because the pendulum is always swinging. And once you think you have something, Babylon Bee on the upswing of everything moving conservative, moving right, they really, led the way in terms of the satire and all that kind of stuff. But they could get trapped in this kind of nasty place where they really go deep and defend this, and then eventually they kind of
it gets sticky.
They lose some of their influence sticky. And stuff. So,
and I will give Babylon Bee the benefit of the doubt in that they are primarily, I'd say, a media criticism satirical site where they are maybe criticizing
not taking a stance.
Right. They're criticizing the media. And if the media is paying attention to Christian nationalism, the Babylon Bee is going to respond to it. And I'm going to give that to them. This is a piece of media criticism and perhaps not a guiding light for Christians within the church.
Well, yes, hopefully that is the case for any satirical outlet. But yeah.
Hopefully,
yeah.